Mr. Raymond, you need to go to the hospital immediately. Your life is in danger.
Mr. Raymond, you need to go to the hospital immediately. Your life is in danger. The words didn't come from a doctor. They came from a woman in a faded cleaning uniform, standing at the far end of the luxurious boardroom with a mop in her hand. For a moment, silence fell across the glass-walled conference room on the 35th floor of Raymond Pharmaceuticals Tower. Executives stared at her as if time had frozen. Their CEO, David Raymond, 56 years old and worth over $3 billion, lowered his phone slowly, disbelief written all over his face. "Excuse me?" David's voice dripped with derision. His forehead glistened with sweat. His hands trembled slightly, but arrogance held him upright. The cleaning lady, Angela Morris, did not flinch. Her eyes, sharp and steady, met his without hesitation. She had just witnessed what no one else dared to acknowledge: the subtle droop in his left eyelid, the faint slur in his words during a heated call with investors, the unsteady sway as he tried to rise from his leather chair. Signs everyone else had brushed off as fatigue. "Are you giving me medical advice?" David let out a harsh laugh, breaking the stunned silence of the room. "What's your background again? Advanced vacuuming? Certified in dust removal?" The sarcasm cut through the air like a blade, drawing uncomfortable chuckles from a few executives who dared not oppose him. Angela's grip on her cleaning cart tightened, but her voice remained calm. "I know what I saw, sir. Tremors. Confusion. It could be neurological. You need urgent evaluation." The CEO's face darkened with irritation. "You are nothing but a cleaning lady. Do your job, mop the floor, and stay out of matters far beyond you. The next time you have the brilliant idea of speaking up, remember—" He leaned closer, his voice a venomous whisper. "I pay some of the best doctors in the country. I don't need health tips from someone who scrubs toilets for a living." Angela said nothing more. She simply bent down, quietly arranging her supplies. But inside, a decision was already forming. She would not let arrogance write the obituary of a man who refused to see the truth. The powerful CEO had no idea. The woman he mocked as invisible had just noticed the signs that could save his life. If only he would listen. David Raymond was a man used to control. To the world, he was the iron-willed billionaire who built a pharmaceutical empire from the ground up. His decisions moved markets, his signature determined the fate of thousands of employees, and his voice could silence a room in an instant. He lived in glass towers, wore custom suits, and spoke as though the air itself bent to his authority. To his board, he was untouchable. To his rivals, ruthless. To his employees, a force of nature. And to himself, immortal. Which is why the mere suggestion that something could be wrong with him, especially from a woman who carried bleach and rags, was an insult he could not tolerate. Angela Morris, on the other hand, lived in shadows. She moved silently through hallways where others rushed past without so much as a glance. She was invisible in the hierarchy of power, a uniformed figure wheeling her cart of supplies, while executives in tailored suits discussed billion-dollar mergers. No one asked her name. Few even noticed when she was there. But invisibility came with a hidden strength: observation. While others saw only the surface, David's sharp commands, his booming confidence, Angela noticed the cracks. She had seen the tremor in his left hand grow worse each week. She had watched him struggle to grip a pen during meetings, his knuckles whitening as if sheer pride alone kept him steady. She had caught the fleeting blankness in his eyes, the kind that no amount of bravado could disguise. The contrast between them could not have been sharper. One held all the power, yet denied his fragility. The other held no authority at all, yet quietly recognized the truth. And it was precisely this contrast that fueled the tension. For David, her warning was nothing more than a challenge to his throne. For Angela, it was an act of conscience she could no longer ignore. As David barked orders and belittled those around him, Angela silently swept the floors, listening, watching, recording every detail in her mind. What he considered weakness, her lowly job, her silence, was, in reality, her greatest strength, because in that silence, she was gathering the evidence that might one day become the only thing standing between life and death. The titan of power and the invisible woman had entered a collision course neither could yet see. The next morning, the board assembled for a high-stakes meeting with international investors. Cameras streamed live to partners across 3 continents. David Raymond entered the room with his usual air of authority, his suit pressed, his tie immaculate. To the untrained eye, he looked every inch the unstoppable CEO. But Angela, pushing her cleaning cart along the corridor outside, caught a glimpse of him through the glass wall. His steps were slower. His left shoulder dipped ever so slightly, with each stride. When he extended a hand to greet a director, it trembled just enough for her to notice. Inside the boardroom, the meeting began. David launched into his presentation, his voice booming with confidence. Yet only minutes in, something strange happened. He asked the same question twice, then 3 times. Executives shifted uncomfortably in their chairs. His CFO, Mark Sullivan, leaned forward, concern etched across his face. "Sir," Mark said softly, lowering his voice, "are you all right? You seem a little confused today." Confused? The word detonated like a grenade. David slammed his palm on the polished mahogany table. "Confused? I am perfectly fine," his voice thundered through the room. "Maybe you're the one not keeping up with my thinking. I've always been 3 steps ahead of everyone here." The tension was thick. No one dared push further. The meeting resumed, though whispers exchanged in glances betrayed the unease. From the back of the room, as she discreetly collected used glasses and wiped surfaces, Angela saw it all. She noticed how David blinked rapidly as though trying to bring the world back into focus. She saw the subtle tremor ripple down his left arm when he gripped his coffee cup. Details invisible to the powerful but glaringly obvious to her trained eyes. Because what no one knew, not even David, was that Angela had once been a nurse. 15 years in the neurology ward had trained her to see what others missed. She could recognize the early signs of stroke, aneurysm, or progressive neurological disease as clearly as others might recognize a fever. Yet here she was, reduced to cleaning the very office of a man who dismissed her humanity. And here he was, ignoring the warnings his own body screamed at him. The empire's future balanced on the fragile body of its arrogant king, and the only person who could see the truth was the woman he refused to hear. Over the following weeks, the signs grew louder, yet still, no one dared to confront them. In the middle of a quarterly strategy session, David reached for a pen. It slipped from his fingers twice before he managed to hold it steady. The directors politely pretended not to notice, their eyes glued to the presentation slides. Angela, quietly refilling water pitchers, watched his knuckles strain as he gripped the pen like a lifeline. One morning, as he descended the marble staircase of his headquarters, his foot faltered. For a terrifying second, his body pitched forward, saved only by the railing he clutched with both hands. His assistant gasped, but David waved her off. "I'm fine, just distracted." The lie tasted bitter in his mouth, but pride forced it through his lips. At a press conference, reporters noticed something too. His once flawless oratory stumbled. He repeated phrases, his speech slurred slightly at the edges of sentences. Social media buzzed with speculation. Jet lag, his PR team claimed. Stress, his doctors assured. But Angela knew better. Each evening, in the silence of her modest apartment, she filled page after page in her worn leather notebook. 9:14 a.m., tremor visible in left hand while holding glass. 2:47 p.m., blank stare lasting 10 seconds during board discussion. 5:05 p.m., stumbled on stairs, balance impaired. Every detail, every observation, meticulously documented. It wasn't paranoia, it was evidence. Yet, the more the symptoms revealed themselves, the louder David's arrogance became. At dinner parties, when his wife Margaret asked gently about his health, he snapped, "I built this company from nothing. Do you really think I can't handle a little fatigue?" Angela saw the truth the others refused to acknowledge. The man who considered himself indestructible was crumbling before their eyes. And if nothing was done, the collapse wouldn't just claim his life, it would destabilize the empire he ruled. But she also understood something else. The window of time was shrinking. The rhythm of his decline had accelerated. What began as whispers in his body were becoming screams. Soon, denial would no longer matter. His body would betray him in front of everyone. And Angela knew that when that moment came, she had to be ready. Angela Morris hadn't always been invisible. 5 years earlier, she had worn not a cleaning uniform, but a nurse's coat. For 15 years, she worked at St. Mary's Hospital, head nurse in the neurology department. Her colleagues admired her precision. Her patients adored her compassion. She had saved lives on operating tables, spotted aneurysms others had missed, and guided families through the darkest hours of their lives. But her career ended not because of incompetence, but because of courage. Angela had discovered a troubling pattern. Black patients at the hospital consistently received lower doses of pain medication than white patients with identical conditions. She spoke up, documenting over 200 cases across 3 years. She brought the evidence to hospital leadership. The backlash was swift. The chief physician, a man with political ties and deep pockets, labeled her unstable and emotionally compromised. Colleagues she had trusted distanced themselves. An internal investigation twisted her meticulous reports into unfounded accusations. Finally, a fabricated violation of medication protocols, never proven but loudly declared, stripped her of her nursing license. In less than 6 months, Angela lost her career, her reputation, and her identity. With no hospital willing to hire her, she took cleaning jobs just to survive. Yet even as she scrubbed floors and polished desks, her medical instincts never switched off. She noticed the details others ignored. The faint limp in a businessman's walk, the nervous tick in an assistant's eye, the way stress carved itself into pale faces. So when she looked at David Raymond, she wasn't seeing him as a billionaire CEO. She was seeing him as a patient, just like the countless she had cared for. The tremors, the slurred speech, the confusion, they were all too familiar. But unlike the patients who once trusted her, David dismissed her entirely. To him, she was nothing but background noise, a shadow in the gleaming tower he ruled. Still, Angela knew her worth. She had been broken by injustice before, but this time she would not stay silent, because this was not about her job. This was about an oath she had taken long ago, to save lives, even when those lives belonged to people who despised her. And she would keep that oath, even if the world never recognized it. Angela knew that words alone would never convince a man like David Raymond. His pride was too fortified, his arrogance too sharp. If she wanted to save him, she needed proof, undeniable, irrefutable proof. So she began documenting everything, every tremor, every slurred phrase, every staggered step. Her leather notebook became a clinical journal, each page marked with precise times, detailed observations, and subtle patterns she alone could see. Monday, 9:32 a.m. Difficulty gripping pen during. Signature. Hand shook for 6 seconds. Wednesday, 11:17 a.m. Repeated same question 3 times in boardroom. Colleagues appeared concerned. Friday, 2:45 p.m. Stumbled leaving elevator, balance impaired. She wasn't just recording symptoms, she was building a case. Angela also knew she couldn't fight this battle alone. Fate intervened one evening in the company parking lot, where she helped an elderly woman who had stumbled. Her calm, practiced way of supporting the woman caught the attention of Dr. Patricia Williams, a retired neurologist consulting part-time in the same building. "You were a nurse," Dr. Williams observed, not as a question, but as a statement. "For 15 years, Angela admitted cautiously, bracing for judgment. Instead, Patricia smiled. "And you still are, whether the world sees it or not." Over coffee, Angela confided in her. She described David's symptoms, showed Patricia her notebook. The older doctor's expression grew grim. Brain tumor, aneurysm, or a degenerative condition like multiple sclerosis. Whatever it is, he needs urgent evaluation. This is no longer a matter of if, Angela, it's a matter of when. Together, they devised a plan. Patricia would use her medical credibility to approach David's wife, Margaret, herself a former nurse. Angela would continue to quietly observe, gather evidence, and prepare a detailed report strong enough to force the issue when the time came. At night, Angela typed by lamplight, each word chosen carefully, each symptom documented with clinical precision. She knew Margaret would understand the language, the urgency. By dawn, she had a 47-page document, a report that could save a life or cost her everything if dismissed. David thought he silenced her with insults. But in the quiet hours, Angela was writing the story that could alter his destiny. The moment of decision came on a Thursday evening. The building was nearly empty, the boardroom lights casting long shadows across the polished floor. David Raymond sat alone at his desk, papers scattered in front of him, his tie loosened, his face pale under the fluorescent glow. Angela entered quietly with her cleaning cart, as she had 100 times before. But this time, what she saw froze her in place. David's hand shook violently as he tried to sign a document. The pen slipped twice before rolling to the floor. His breathing was shallow, uneven, each inhale strained as though his chest resisted the air itself. His complexion, once ruddy with confidence, had drained to a sickly gray. Then it happened. He pressed his palm to his chest and stayed there, longer than usual. A flicker of panic crossed his eyes before he quickly masked it with frustration. Angela's heart pounded. This was no longer subtle. This was no longer something that could be ignored. The evidence had transformed into undeniable reality. She stepped forward, her voice trembling at first, but gaining strength with every word. "Mr. Raymond, this is no longer stress. I've watched you for weeks. The tremors, the slurred speech, the confusion, it's escalating. If you don't seek medical help now, you may not survive what's coming." The silence in the room was suffocating. For a moment, David glared at her, his instinct to lash out ready on his tongue, but something stopped him. Perhaps it was the unwavering certainty in her tone. Perhaps it was the fear that her words mirrored the whispers of his own body. For the first time, his arrogance faltered. His eyes softened, just slightly. "And what if you're wrong?" he asked, his voice rough, almost vulnerable. Angela held her ground. "And what if I'm right? Are you willing to gamble your life, just to silence someone you think is beneath you?" The words pierced through the armor he had built around himself. For the first time, David Raymond did not dismiss her. He didn't agree, not yet. But his silence was no longer rejection. It was consideration. That night, Angela knew. The silence had been broken. The first crack had appeared in his wall of denial. And from that moment forward, there was no turning back. The storm broke during the company's most important board meeting of the year. The top executives, shareholders, and even Margaret Raymond, David's wife, were present. The agenda was succession planning, but David insisted on leading the meeting himself, determined to prove he was still untouchable. He walked into the room slower than usual, his left side noticeably weaker, yet his voice boomed with forced energy. "Ladies and gentlemen, I am perfectly capable of leading this company for another decade," he declared, his words echoing with defiance. Angela, moving silently along the edges of the room as she cleared empty cups, felt her stomach tighten. She could see the twitch in his left cheek, the way his right hand gripped the table for balance. Then came the moment. A director raised a cautious concern. "Mr. Raymond, your health. Are you certain you're not pushing yourself too hard?" The room held its breath. David slammed his fist on the table. "There is nothing wrong with me. I am stronger than ever." His voice cracked under the strain. He rose to his feet as if to prove his point, only for his legs to buckle beneath him. Gasps filled the boardroom. Papers scattered to the floor. David collapsed back into his chair, his face drooping on one side, his words slurred into incoherence. I don't—" He tried to speak, but his tongue betrayed him. His right hand shook uncontrollably as he reached for the glass of water, spilling it across the table. Margaret leapt to his side, panic in her eyes. "David!" she cried, fumbling for her phone. Angela dropped her cleaning supplies and rushed forward. In that instant, she was no longer invisible. She was a nurse again. "Possible stroke!" she shouted, her voice steady with urgency. "Call 911. Keep his airway clear." Executives froze in shock, but her authority snapped them into action. Paramedics were summoned, arriving within minutes. Angela knelt beside David, supporting his head, monitoring his breathing, her hands moving with practiced precision. Dr. Patricia Williams, the retired neurologist Angela had confided in, arrived moments later. She confirmed what Angela had feared. Acute neurological event. If this had gone untreated much longer, it would have been fatal. As David was wheeled into the ambulance, his empire shaken, the truth became undeniable. The woman he had mocked, ignored, and humiliated was the only reason he was still alive. The hospital smelled of antiseptic and urgency. David Raymond lay unconscious in the intensive care unit, tubes snaking from his arms, monitors tracking every fragile heartbeat. For the first time in decades, the man who believed himself indestructible was utterly powerless. Margaret sat by his bedside, her hands trembling as she clutched his. She had tried for weeks to make him listen, only to be brushed aside with cold arrogance. Now, her worst fears had been confirmed. The doctors delivered the verdict, a slow-bleeding brain aneurysm dangerously close to rupture. Had he collapsed just days later, survival would have been nearly impossible. "It was caught in time only because of the observations provided to us," said Dr. Chen, the attending neurologist. "Someone documented his symptoms with extraordinary precision." "Who did this?" Margaret frowned. "Documented?" The answer arrived minutes later. Angela appeared at the hospital, her worn leather notebook in hand. With quiet determination, she handed it over to Margaret. "Every symptom, every episode, for the last 2 months. I knew he wouldn't listen to me, but I couldn't just stand by." Margaret flipped through the pages, her eyes widening. Dates, times, detailed medical notes written with the precision of a professional. It was the work not of a cleaning lady, but of a nurse. "You," Margaret whispered, realization dawning. "You were a nurse." "I was," Angela said softly, "before my career was taken from me. But that doesn't matter. What matters is that your husband finally gets the help he needs." Margaret's throat tightened. Tears welled in her eyes, not only from fear for her husband, but from the crushing irony. The woman her husband had mocked as invisible had been the only one who truly saw him. Meanwhile, back at the company headquarters, the fallout had already begun. Whispers turned to outrage as word spread. The billionaire CEO had nearly died because he refused to heed warnings from someone he considered beneath him. Executives who had laughed at Angela's concern now scrambled to cover their negligence. But the truth was already out. The cleaning lady, dismissed and humiliated, had saved the life of the man who ruled them all. And for the first time, The world would have to recognize her. News of David Raymond's collapse spread like wildfire. By the next morning, headlines dominated every major outlet. Invisible cleaning lady saves billionaire CEO. Janitor spots symptoms doctors ignored. Power, pride, and the price of arrogance. Social media exploded. Hashtags like Inger listened to the invisible and Angela the hero trended worldwide. Memes, op-eds, and TV debates dissected every angle of the story. Corporate arrogance, systemic discrimination, the overlooked wisdom of ordinary workers. Inside Raymond Pharmaceuticals, panic reigned. Stock prices dropped by nearly $300 million in 3 days. Investors demanded answers. The board of directors called an emergency session, scrambling to control the narrative. Emails leaked to the press made things worse. Angela's 47-page report had been sent to 2 directors weeks earlier. Both had dismissed it as paranoia and even suggested firing her for inappropriate behavior. Now, those very messages were plastered across the evening news. Executives who once smirked at Angela's warnings found themselves under fire. Shareholders demanded resignations. Employees whispered in hallways, ashamed that the woman who scrubbed their floors had seen more clearly than anyone in the building. Meanwhile, Angela refused interviews and money offers. Reporters swarmed her apartment, but she turned them away with quiet dignity. "I didn't do this for fame," she told one persistent journalist. "I did it because saving lives is what I was trained to do. That doesn't change, no matter what uniform I wear." Her humility only made the story grow larger. Civil rights groups hailed her as a symbol of resilience. Medical organizations debated how bias and status blinded professionals from seeing the obvious. Angela's name became a rallying cry for justice and equality. And David Raymond? From his hospital bed, he watched his empire teeter on the edge, not from market forces, but from his own arrogance. The board placed him on indefinite medical leave. He, the man who believed he was untouchable, had become the face of corporate hubris. But amid the humiliation, one truth was undeniable. He owed his life to the woman he had treated as invisible, and the world would never let him forget it. Weeks later, David Raymond sat in a wheelchair at the National Health and Humanity Awards ceremony. His once booming voice was softer now. His hands still trembled slightly, but his eyes carried something no one had ever seen in him before: humility. At the center of the stage stood Angela Morris, still wearing the same style of navy cleaning, uniform she had worn the day she spoke up. But tonight, it was not a symbol of invisibility. It was a banner of triumph. The Surgeon General of the United States pinned a medal to her chest. The audience of dignitaries, doctors, and leaders rose to their feet, applauding for nearly 10 minutes. Cameras flashed. Tears rolled down faces. For once, the world was united in celebrating the quiet courage of someone society had tried to erase. In the front row, David's wife, Margaret, clutched his hand tightly. She remembered the late-night fights, the warnings ignored, the arrogance that nearly destroyed everything. Now, she watched the woman her husband had belittled be honored before the nation. Angela stepped to the microphone. Her voice, calm and resolute, carried through the hushed hall. "For 15 years, I was a nurse. For 5 years, I was invisible. I wore a uniform that made people assume I had nothing to say, nothing to offer. But a uniform doesn't erase knowledge. It doesn't erase compassion. It doesn't erase duty. I didn't save a life because I was asked. I didn't save a life because I was respected. I saved a life because saving lives is what I swore to do. Some oaths are stronger than prejudice, stronger than power, stronger than arrogance." Applause thundered again, echoing like a wave. Behind her, a display screen lit up with a new exhibit. Angela's cleaning uniform, donated to the National Museum of African American History. Beneath it, a plaque read, "The uniform of a woman who proved that competence has no status and courage has no rank." David's throat tightened. For the first time in his life, tears blurred his vision, not from pride, but from shame and gratitude woven together. He whispered, almost to himself, "I owe her everything." After the ceremony, he asked to see her privately. When Angela entered the small waiting room, he struggled to meet her gaze. Finally, he said simply, "I was a fool. You saw what I refused to. You saved my life, even though I gave you every reason not to." Angela's reply was steady, unyielding. "I didn't do it for you. I did it because every life matters, even the lives of those who can't see the worth in others." In that moment, David Raymond understood the depth of his failure. Not in business, not in health, but in humanity. And it was a lesson he would spend the rest of his life trying to live up to. The story became legend, not because a billionaire nearly died, but because the world saw that greatness often comes from the places it least expects. Sometimes the greatest revenge is not destroying those who look down on you. It's saving them, proving that your humanity will always be greater than their cruelty.